Everybody please stand, raise your hands. Glorious and most honorable Father's name is Yahweh. Father, this is your servant, Count Illy Haller Hawkins, coming along with all of your great people from here at Abel, Father, and the many nations abroad that are tuning in through the internet at this time and the satellite, Father. All of us being a seed of the seventh Malach in these last days, our great teacher and the only one sent to bring forth your message to this dying world, the great Khan Yisrayl Hawkins, and through the authority of our high priest has been placed over your house, the great Yeshua Messiah. Most righteous fathers, do come before you at this time, bringing in this Sabbath day, thanking you and praising you for the week you have given us. We do continually pray, Father, for the health of your people, that they would remain strong, Father Yahweh. We continually pray for the knowledge and the understanding being brought forth from our great teacher in these last days, the one you have placed over us, that our minds would continually be open to take hold of this message, that we ourselves may become great teachers, Father Yahweh, and that the 2 billion will soon come, Father Yahweh, and that these wars will soon take place, that your kingdom would firmly be established upon this earth, that the death and the disease and the complete insanity which we see at this time would no longer exist, but be removed far from us. And we do continually pray for all of those who are assisting your house, but not yet a part of your house, Father Yahweh, for their safety and protection, that no harm would come upon any of them, and that all of your works would be carried out, that all glory may be given unto your great and most righteous name. We do ask all of these things once again, by and through the authority of our high priest, Yeshua Messiah, being a seed of the seventh Malach. Hallelujah, Yahweh. Praise Yahweh. Everyone may be seated. We're going to begin on page 19 of the 10th book of Yisrayl, part 2, believing into the one sent. Believing into the one sent. And that's exactly what Yeshua Messiah, to recall to your remembrance once again. In Yachanan 6:29, Yeshua Messiah said, "For this is the work of Yahweh, that we believe into the one whom Yahweh has sent." And in these last days, there is only one sent which we must believe into, tethering ourselves to the choicest branch, that we ourselves may become worthy to be in this administration, in this kingdom, that we can hold on to that position, that crown, and hold on to it, that no man take our crown, no one corrupt our minds, let no one bring in that little bit of leaven that could destroy our minds. And that's exactly what our teacher is doing in these last days. He's showing us how to rid all of the leavening out of our body, out of our minds, just as we recently went through for the Feast of Passover, koshering our houses and everything which we dwelt, being very meticulous, looking very carefully to make sure that we remove some or all. And then after the feast is over with, it's always a common thing. You find some stuck somewhere back in a corner that you didn't even realize you even had anything there. In fact, I heard of a brother who said that he went out to his barbecue pit, lifted it up, and had a pack of crackers on his grill. He said he can't figure out why in the world he stuck them there, but they were there. You know, and I tend to wonder why he stuck them there too. But it's interesting how these things come about and how these things take place. We're going to pick up once again on page 19, and the sermon is entitled Deceptions. It's number 16. The character of the tribe of Benjamin controlled the temple. The teachings of the Pharisees are the teachings of the Catholics today. The Catholics today, no matter what they want to call themselves, in the end, they're Catholics. Like pastors always said, if they walk like a duck, if they quack like a duck, they're a duck. And when we get into this, we're going to read about a little bit more of these ducks who they tend to bring out these revelations to the world as though no one knew. And it's supposed to be this great news for everyone. But we're going to pick up in verse 3. Pastor says, "Don't forget we need your help." Now, keep in mind, this was just after the Peaceful Solution Conference had taken place in July of 2010, and we had people tuned in from all around the world, as well as many people here, both men and women, attending the conferences as we broadcast them live from Abelin, Texas. And these peace conferences went out to this entire world. Now, Pastor goes on to say that don't forget we need your help. I was just handed another shocker. The dollar is down and the euro went up again because of something somebody said in Washington. And it's very humorous how someone in Washington can make a comment and the price of something or the worth of something can go up and down just on a person's very few words. And you may be thinking, well, why is the euro so important to us? Well, for many of you who don't know, this satellite that we watch free of charge, it doesn't cost us a penny to watch our free-to-air satellites, which goes all around the world, where that is paid in euros. That's how we have to pay our bill in euros. And it's constantly, to watch the euro be worth more than the dollar is to watch the system fight against Yahweh's house itself. And there's no other reason for the euro to be worth more than the dollar in their system other than try to oppress Yahweh's house. But that's the way we have to pay. And when the euro goes up, the dollar goes down, of course, it costs us more. It takes more American dollars to equal a euro. And in the end, it's just more money. Now, Pastor goes on to say, they opened their mouths and they said it's going to take at least another 5 or 6 years. And when someone says that, of course, they're speaking about profit. They want to come into their pockets. And Pastor says it would be better if they'd had a zipper placed on their mouth. Because sometimes people speak things in Washington and they don't really consider the hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people they affect with their comments. And we see these things every day in the news, though. It's not just politicians not all politicians are bad, and I'm not meaning that in any which way, shape, or form. I've met with many of them. I know the missionary team has met with many. A pastor has met with many, and so has many other people here in the House of Yahweh met with many, many politicians. And I think many of the ones we speak with desire to do something that's beneficial. But they realize very quickly when they go into office, they're one voice of very many. And unless they can get a following of a group of people, their voice means absolutely nothing. But that voice is getting ready to become louder. That voice is getting ready to shout, because once these wars start, they're going to have no one else to turn to. But just to give you an example how one man's words can change many things, Warren Buffett announced this week that he has stage 1 prostate cancer. Now, after his announcement, and of course, Warren Buffett he's either the second or third richest man in the world right now. He's the CEO of Berkshire Hathaway, and he became the CEO back in 1965. Now, immediately the stocks fell because of the thought of that man not running that company made people feel that company wasn't worth as much, just over the words he said. Now, you tend to wonder, since there's hundreds of people that run that company, he being the top one, would that company truly falter that fast? Well, people feel that way. But once again, they invest their money. And to give you an idea, I did some looking up because I know the numbers are astronomical. Warren Buffett, in 1965, when he became CEO, if you would have invested $10,000, and $10,000 may not be a lot of money today, but in 1965, it was a lot of money. Keep in mind, you could have bought a brand new car for $3,000. But in 1965, if you had invested $10,000 in Berkshire Hathaway, your investment would have been worth $50 million today. Your $10,000 investment. And there's other people that we've seen the very same thing take place with, such as Steve Jobs, who was the CEO of Apple. He was the originator of Apple along with a few other people, and then he was moved out of the company in 1997. He was brought back into the company because Apple was on the verge of bankruptcy. And when he was brought back in, very few people know that Steve Jobs, when Apple was faltering, he went to someone and asked them to invest. And the person that invested in Apple that actually helped Apple not go bankrupt was Bill Gates. And Bill Gates invested $150 million. And that's what kept Apple afloat. Now, this is very interesting because Business News actually broke this down on a level for you and I. Most people, when Apple comes out with a new product, people will run out and buy it, whether it's the latest iPhone, the latest iPad, the latest iMac computer that just come out. So for people, just your average consumer, since 1997, and that's when Steve Jobs took his place back in Apple again, if you would have bought every product that was put out, in other words, if you would have bought the first iPhone, the second iPhone, the third iPhone, the fourth iPhone, and you had your iPod, and you bought your iPad 1, 2, and 3, and you got yourself an iMac, and then 3 years later when a new one came out, if you'd have bought another one. So if you'd just done what the basic consumer does, instead of buying the Apple product, if you would have took that money and put it into Apple stock, your investment would be worth right around $11,120,000 now. And that's for your average consumer. Now, once again, with Steve Jobs, when it came out that he was sick, Apple stock fell. And it fell tremendously because people believed in the one person who was running the program. But once again, he died. Bill Gates is another person when he stepped down from Microsoft. When he stepped down, stocks fell. But as they do business, they come back up. Now, these are people investing in businesses who they know eventually are going to falter. After all, the people that are running them that they believe so much in are dying, or they've already died. But they'll invest money. Most consumers will invest their money in buying their product and not even realize they could have made money in the stock because the deception that's there with the information that's put forth. Now, why is all this important, and how does this tie into the house of Yahweh? How many people, if you ask them today to invest in the house of Yahweh or the peaceful solution, when Pastor asks, we need your help? And yes, it takes finances to get the word out. Hundreds of thousands of dollars to get the word out. How many people do you see running to invest? Very few. In fact, it's the poorest of the poor whom Yahweh has called out to actually support this work. And He's getting it done. Praise Yahweh. Now compare that to the richest of the rich, whether it be Apple or Microsoft or Berkshire Hathaway or ExxonMobil. Eventually they peak and then they start going down. And they all know that you need to get it why they say the getting's good. That's their words, because eventually it goes away. But the only thing on this earth that you can invest in, and Yahweh doesn't really ask for your money. He asks for 10%. He asks for the tithe, which are His. But He asks for your loyalty. He asks for our time. He asks for us to put everything we have in behind getting this work done. Yahweh doesn't care how rich or poor you are. He's willing to give you everything if you will give Him everything. If you will give Him your all, He will give you His all. And that's exactly what's taking place in these last days. It's an investment that many people in the end would make. But many people have thrown it away. Many people have been called out to this great marriage supper and have walked away. They didn't show up. They're not coming. So Yahweh has said, Yeshua said, go out into the streets, find anyone who will come. Anyone who's willing to keep the rules. Anyone who's willing to be obedient. Anyone who's willing to follow my way, invite them. Go out into the streets and bring them in. And that's what's been done in these last days. And Yahweh says this will be a great work and it will be a short work, but it will be accomplished. And unlike these other companies, which I'm not intending anything evil about them, this will not falter. This one will grow forever and ever. And if you want to put something into it, how much more do you think Steve Jobs would have paid if he could have kept his life? The richest man in the world, or the richest men in the world, they die. There's not a thing they can do. Warren Buffett, very wealthy man, worth billions of dollars. The only hope he would have at living would be to repent and turn to Yahweh's house. All the billions of dollars he has, not one of them will save his life. Now that seems like a mystery to this world, but if you want to keep death from coming upon you, you stop doing it. You can discontinue doing it. In verse 4, Pastor says, but we do need your help again, and don't forget, I don't know anyone who takes notice or takes the time to stop and think about what it costs to run this house now. And I know we recently went over that with the people who do the commercials on the men. We met with them to give them an idea how much it actually costs to get this work done. And we need to consider that when we go pick up a prophetic word, when we pick up a newsletter, how we need to become responsible for those things. When we pick up a brochure from the stand over there, all of those things are free to us, but someone had to pay for them. And yes, it is tithe money that pays for a lot of this stuff, but the work has to be done, and there's more than just publishing books. There's much more that has to be done, and we have to assist in those things. We have to get this word out. And there's many people who have, in fact, during the feast, everyone had the pleasure of hearing a man from Lagos, Nigeria, who spoke. And for those of you that didn't catch it or didn't hear, when he found out about the House of Yahweh, this is on the other side of the earth. 6,500 miles away, he found out about the House of Yahweh by prophetic word that somebody had, but they didn't want anymore. So they let him have it to read. And that's how he found out about the House of Yahweh. Praise Yahweh. Now, in verse 6, Pastor says in Revelations, now all things that are taking place here today, and the peaceful solution is going out, and the peaceful solution is going out. And it's going out to hundreds and thousands of people. And many people, they don't see these things, but brothers, they're going out. This word is going out. And the doors are going to be open more and more for everyone to see. And by Tabernacles, the doors will be open even much more for everyone to see how many hundreds of thousands of people are being called out. Hundreds of thousands, which in comparison to 2 billion is absolutely nothing. But we have to believe with everything we have that 2 billion people will be coming and that we have to train to teach them. We cannot be slack in our jobs. Now, if you remember, and Yahweh's talking about bringing salvation in Zechariah, and he said before the house, he said, blessed are the people who were here, or who were there to hear the prophecies of the house to be established. And blessed are those who were there to see the foundation poured and so forth. And he said, before that day, there was no salvation. Now, how blessed are we to be able to come into this great house, to be able to sit at the feet of the only one sent in these last days to bring forth this message. What better time to live? You literally can look back at your grandmother, your grandfather, and think they played a part in bringing me to this point, but how much of a role did they get to play in this? Well, they brought you to this point. Their DNA, their makeup, the things that you were taught, these things all played in. Before this plan ever began its course, Yahweh had all of these things in line, and he knew how this would play out. And he knew that you would be able to be called out in these last days. It's within all of us to overcome sin. It's within all of us to become teachers of righteousness. No matter how much this world wants to tell you, you can't overcome these things, you can't be perfect, you can't do this, you can't do that, Yahweh says you can. And 99% of the time you have queers out here telling you can't do it. And that's just point blank. Now I want to read you something that this just come out. When Pastor's talking about if the house of Yahweh hadn't come out, there was no salvation left. There would be no salvation. This article came out today. It was on Fox News, and it says, Jewish movement in Israel okays gay rabbis. Now, that was about as shocking as an 8-month-old pregnant teen telling her mom and dad she's no longer a virgin. It was like this big announcement that's coming out for everybody to see, but it's not like Pastor hasn't brought these things years in advance. It says the conservative Jewish seminary, go figure that one, in Israel says it will allow gays and lesbians to become rabbis over years of opposition by many of its own leaders and setting up a new point of contentions between the movement and Israeli Orthodox establishments. Like other branches of Judaism, conservative Judaism, a major denomination in the United States, but a marginal force in Israel, has faced calls for greater openness toward gays and lesbians, despite biblical prohibition on homosexual conduct. So they acknowledge that these things are condemned in their Bible, but they're accepting them. And here's some of the reasoning behind it. This is a quotation. It says, in the conservative world, there are rabbis who accept ordination of gays and lesbian students as well as those who do not. The statement said that the decision is the result of a long process that includes broad consultation and a search to find a consensus among different opinions that will allow continued cooperation. Now, truly, everyone can get along if we just let everyone do what they want to do. Right? If you go back and read why there's going to be a nuclear baby, It all starts with this illicit relationships that they allow for themselves. You know, they go out, they do what they want to do with whoever they want to do it with, and then they learn to hate because they can't come to an agreement between two. Can two walk together unless they be in agreement? Absolutely not. The only way to be in an agreement is to do what Yahweh has said. You can't agree on something, you'll spend your whole life trying to prove Yahweh to be a liar. Mankind has done that for 6,000 years, and not one person is left standing that's alive that has tried to do it. Now, one of the Orthodox rabbis and former lawmaker said he could appreciate the movement outreach to the gay and lesbian members. I think this decision was out of consideration for the people who are homosexual and lesbian and wanted them to be able to be ordained. Now, Melchior, whose views on religious and politics are more liberal than Orthodox establishments. That means he's more accepting of them. Now, these are people who are supposed to stand for the Torah. And they say they do stand for the Torah. But the more they speak, the more they talk, they sound just like the Aaronic priesthood that sits on the 7 hills of Rome. There's not much difference in between them. Maybe one holds a needle on the back of their hand, and the other will do as he pleases. Maybe one will say he keeps the Sabbath, and the other one says he keeps the Lord's Day. But they both profane the Sabbath. They both spit in Yahweh's face. But these people, brothers, they're not taught yet. They're unlearned. No matter what degree they hold up, no matter what college they go to, what we're offered in these last days in this house is far greater than what they've been taught. And they're truly only a product of the system. That's what they become, a product of the system. And they need to be educated. And that's what our jobs are, to learn to educate these people, not to stand up and continually tell them that what they're doing is wrong, but to show them what they're doing is wrong, to show them how they're actually bringing death upon themselves and others. Praise Yahweh. If everyone will turn over to page 20, in verse 8 it says, "But before that time period, when Yahweh says, 'In these last days I will establish my house,' and before that time, of course, there was no salvation. And no, there's not. And there's no salvation outside of Yahweh's house. None whatsoever. There's that mixture of righteousness and evil, but there is no one, nowhere, no how, no place bringing life outside of Yahweh's house. And when someone chooses to walk away from Yahweh's house, the life leaves them. The only time that we can have that life, that silver cord, is when we're tethered to the chosen branch. We cut that line loose, our silver cord is cut, and to ashes we will return, to the dust of the earth, as King Solomon said. We have to remain tethered in line with the teachings of Yahweh's anointed one. But he said, if you remember, there was no peace. The enemy had turned every single person against one another, and that's what we're fighting today. You know, people have a hatred. I've covered this for several weeks now. I've covered this now in several weeks' time, but I see a general resistance. It's almost like a fear of one another, and of course a resentment against change. And that's one thing that this world, when you go out and you speak to those in the world, and we went through it our very selves when we came to the house of Yahweh, it's bred within us not to want to change. We want a change in our lives, but we don't want to have to do anything to cause that change to take place. We want everyone around us to change. But that's one thing when you come to the house of Yahweh, you realize the first thing that needs to change is you. And that's every individual. And that's part of humbling ourselves and admitting that we knew nothing before we came. If you look down to verse 11, it says, our brother Yeshua has already made it, and he was resented with the same resentment that you're harboring in this field of resenting your brother, resentment towards your brother, or resentment towards the house of Yahweh growth. We have enemies in the house. They don't mean to be. They're here for salvation. It's almost like they're hanging on, thinking maybe we're not right, or fearing we're not right, that the house of Yahweh is not going to make it. But then, if they come to services and we bring out, well, here's what the prophecy said, and here's exactly what's taking place, sure, this puts a little bit of fear in them, and they can repent for a little while, but they seem to lax back into this attitude. And that's where people tend to leave the house of Yahweh. They tend to think, well, I really think pastor's right, but maybe he's wrong. Just maybe he's wrong. I mean, after all, I've been here with people for years and they've left. They've been enjoying life out in the world for 10 years now. Look at how great they became. They're head cashier at Walmart. And I don't mean anything negative toward anybody who works at Walmart. But it amazes me how people will be in the house of Yahweh and they leave the house of Yahweh for riches, and they're no better than what they were when they were in the house of Yahweh. Financially, they steal their tithe, they spend it on the foolishness of this world, and they would have been much better off being in the house of Yahweh, paying their tithes, keeping Yahweh's feast, and rejoicing and laying their hands to the plow. The richest people on the face of this earth never go outside these gates. They dedicate their lives to service. Those are the richest people on the face of this earth. You know, and brothers, never give in to this foolishness of life is so much better on the outside of these gates. You know, I've only been in the house of Yahweh for like 17 years. If I could count the times I've heard people say how much better life is, and then see them years later to see the hell they're living in, it's sad, because then they have to realize they need to humble themselves. Many people have left and they go out into this world thinking that the peaceful solution, well, no one was using it there. The most peaceful people you'll ever find is using the peaceful solution here in the house of Yahweh. You can actually settle a conflict in the house of Yahweh if two or more people will agree on the peaceful solution. And it's the same way out in the world. But they go out there thinking life is so much greater, just to end up in some kind of legal trouble or some other kind of trouble, that their life totally starts falling apart on them. And it's sad, because Pastor stood up here behind this podium night and day, and with tears he cried out to all of them. We don't have to go through that. We never have to go that way. If there's ever any doubt that what Pastor is saying is right, go to the priest and ask. If you have a question about something, go ask. There is nothing that the priest, and if we can't answer it, we'll go to Pastor and we'll ask. Sometimes answers take time. Yahweh's plan was not an overnight thing. If Abel would have expected it all to take place before he died, Abel wouldn't have done his job. If Yahshua Messiah would expect it to be the latest and greatest thing, he would have never laid the work that was left to be done on the donkey and the foal of the donkey. But he did do that. He did lay that work on someone he knew would come in these last days. And that includes you and I. You and I. If you look over to verse 18 on page 21, Pastor says, he's saying, let's go over to Genesis, because that's where the prophecy started. And he's speaking of Genesis chapter 49, showing what would take place in these last days. And if you'll get this in your mind and follow these prophecies and see them being fulfilled as this character education now that Yahweh is offering one last time to this entire world. And yes, it's being offered one last time to this entire world. And before it's all said and done, this character education program is going to be offered to anyone who desires it. And it's like I said, by the Feast of Tabernacles, you will see how much this program has been offered to everyone in this world, to anyone who desired. Now, there may be many people who are not able to come, but it's going to be offered to them. And there's many people who are accepting this that they can't get out of their country. They don't have the funding to get here. But that doesn't mean they're not accepting it and putting it to work. The peaceful solution is, I think the Catholic Church is going to die one day. They're going to flip when they see how much we're training their own people. And that's why their people are turning against them, because they see the garbage they're bringing to the people. Well, Yisrayl Hawkins is bringing them the truth. He's telling them like it was, like it is, and like it's going to be. Praise Yahweh. You know, and that's not done out of spite. That's done out of love. And that's true love. Correction is true love. Now, in verse 18, it also says, and Yahshua said, my peace I leave with you. Well, most people, they wouldn't have any inkling of what he's talking about. This must be some spiritual thing. The hocus pocus, diddly docus that he uses, you know, the magic wand. And he does like that. You know, he hits you on the forehead. Pastor gives an example, just like these preachers do in these last days. They'll smack someone on the forehead and you're healed of cancer. And then they die of a heart attack, you know, a month later. Well, I healed them of cancer. I can't help. They didn't ask to be healed from a heart attack. I can't do anything about that. And they run these scams and look at these places. Look at the millions of dollars that are put into these places. And look at what takes place. And there's no work literally being done. Now, Pastor goes on to say, you can get up, your head's still empty, and that's after you get your head smacked one time. You know it's empty as his hand was. The air went nowhere. He might have pushed it in a little ways, you know, and all this stuff is stupidity. And yes, it is stupidity. And a lot of these people, though, they're seeking out. They're seeking out some kind of knowledge and some kind of truth, and they're relying on these people who are teaching them. They go to these mega churches. I know there's a few actually in Texas alone. There's one down in Houston. They fill what used to be a basketball arena. They fill that up every Sunday. And these people are they're searching for something to hold on to. And eventually they're going to see that there's only one place that actually brings something that's of some substance. And it's something that no one else agrees with. No one else walks with. Everyone else condemns. And they're going to see that this building, which is not as grand as their arenas, it doesn't have the nicest carpet, it has the best heating system in the summer and the best cooling system in the winter. It does have that. But you know what? Yahweh's people are joyful, and they come in here night and day to serve. A Sabbath day starts at 3:45 in the morning. And if you're ever here, you can stay around, and usually all the way up until 1, 2 o'clock, first day morning, people are still here working. The Sabbath day goes on for 24 hours in Yahweh's house. Now look down to verse 20. The pastor says, someone told me to tune a show in one day, and they had a group of people that were talking about the King James Version, and they said the Lord's Day and Revelations, and they were arguing about what that day was. And I thought, well, man, they're totally missing the whole subject there of what Yahweh is trying to show them. So you know they need a guide. And that's why they're in this confusion in these last days. That's why there's such death taking place, because they're refusing that guide. They're refusing the one sent who could teach them righteousness. But they need a guide, but they don't want to admit they need a guide. I am the high and mighty, you know, and that's the mindset they have, that they're the high and mighty, and I will go straight to Yahweh. Well, many people in these last days, they've left Yahweh's house saying they're going to go straight to Yahweh. And there's no doubt they're going to go straight to somewhere, but I don't think Yahweh is going to be anywhere in that place. And it's sad, and you really hope and pray, and Yahweh's house has got to be the only place where people will spit in your face, call you the worst of names, tell you how much they hate you, but yet Yahweh's people will pray for that person to repent and see the error of their ways that they may return. And literally welcome you with open arms when you do. And there's been many people whom Yahweh has allowed, and many people who stand strong in Yahweh's house today that once were pulled one way, but they stand very strong and stand right beside the witness in these last days. Now, Pastor goes on to say, I don't even use Yeshua, they say. They've got this high and mighty attitude that they are in direct contact with Yahweh, and of course, they couldn't be further cut off from Him. He won't even accept that kind of attitude, and He, Yeshua, tells them so. Unless you humble yourself and get out this stupidity, you're in no part of my house. You won't even be part of my house unless you can do this, unless you can humble yourself as these little children. Humble yourself as these little children. As a child, as Yeshua Messiah said, we must humble ourselves as a child. You know, one thing that a child does not do that we tend to do as adults who have come out of the system, you can take a group of children and you can give them a job to do, and you can tell one young man or one young lady, you're over this, now I want you to get everything together and everybody go do the job. And they'll go do it. I've experienced that quite a bit. You can take a group of adults and take them and send them out to do a job, and you could have 10 of them, and 3 of them will bitch and gripe because they don't want to know why they wouldn't put in charge. But children, they don't have that bred into them yet. And our children don't have to have that bred into them. That's what that system is offering. That, you know, that rulership control, that I'm going to put you underneath my thumb and squash you. That's not what Yahweh's house teaches. Yahweh's house teaches that this is what you need to do, and it's up to you to choose to do it. It's your choice. You can do what you want to do. You can be obedient and live, or choose rebellion and die. And rebellion is witchcraft. And remember what that witchcraft is. It's that influence that we get from the news media. You get very little news along with the Hollywood glimpse. And then you get the commercials, as the Peaceful Solution teaches, the hundreds of thousands of commercials that has these sexual innuendos because sex sells. And then you have these little sitcoms and everything else. It's all so funny. But the only reason they indulge themselves into these things is try to remove themselves from the hell they're living in. And that's why Hollywood has become such a lucrative business, because people literally will seek these movies and they will go into these theaters and pay astronomical amounts of money to watch these movies. You know, they'll pay $10 for a little box of popcorn because they think they got to have that to watch their movie. And they'll pay $6 for a drink they could have got for $1 outside of the place. And they'll literally go into a fairy tale for 2 hours. But that's the only peace of mind they get. But when they come out with a lot less money, and then they have to go back into the hell which they left. And there's no end in sight. And that's the reason, like Pastor said, that's why we have these carnivals. That's why we have these circuses. That's why we have all of this entertainment. If they didn't have the entertainment, the suicide rate would be unbelievable. It already is astronomical, the people that do commit suicide, but if they didn't have this entertainment, this escape, if these people really woke up to what they were in and they didn't see a hope, you know, that I could see how that would drive them crazy. That would literally cause you to fall, all sanity to leave yourself, to leave your mind. But continuing on, look down to verse 22. Pastor says, I was just reading an article this morning. What I brought out in an article, the real cause of global warming, and that was a June 2007 issue of the Prophetic Word. Pastor says, of course, a lot of people laughed at this article. And he says, well, there are some scientists that took it seriously and they started working on it. And yes, we see many articles coming out after that, after Pastor had brought that, many scientists saying that the atmosphere was alive, that the firmament was alive, that there's bugs in the environment that's actually in the clouds. And it's not hard. You can go on Google and search that, and you can find quite a few articles that are actually saying that now. And the interesting part is, look at the date of the articles. You don't find very many people, if any, that are mentioning it before June of 2007. But after June of 2007, there's an abundance of articles speaking about the environment and how it's alive. And it's actually, I think the one that he brought forth was the clouds are alive. And he says there's several articles out now about the article that I wrote about the firmament that's being governed by kingdoms, microorganisms, but kingdoms of them, kingdoms of microorganisms. Literally, and that's one thing that we have to remember ourselves, and that's one thing even the children can explain. And we as adults have to be able to explain this also. The kingdoms that are in this world, the kingdoms that make up your body itself, all of these things that come together that help us to operate the way we operate. Well, those kingdoms actually make up the atmosphere itself. And you could imagine as when someone takes in unclean food, so to speak, or they commit a sin of fornication, adultery, bestiality, sodomy, any of those things, with those bugs that aren't supposed to be in that kingdom, gets into that kingdom and it starts intruding in that kingdom. Well, of course, that kingdom's going to try to kill the intruder. But the intruder that comes in sometimes is more powerful than what they can kill. So they build up their forces. And they'll try their best to kill the intruder. Even if they have to kill the body itself, they'll kill the intruder. And if you've ever seen someone die of cancer, that's actually what takes place. The body starts trying to fight the cancer, and it literally starts trying to shut down organs so the cancer can't spread. And it will literally shut down everything in your body. And in the end, it feels your body is so confused it thinks it has won. But you're dead. And that's the confusion that takes place in these kingdoms. Same thing takes place with HIV. Your body starts producing so much white blood cells to try to fight this infection, it literally kills your body. That's the confusion of the kingdoms. They were not meant to be ruled that way. They were not meant to be ruled that way at all. If everyone would turn over to page 22, Page 22, pastor says, now this is the kind of authority that I'm speaking of. And he's speaking of the authority that's in these kingdoms that make these things work. Now that's the kind of authority that I'm speaking of. Let me try this again. Now that is the kind of authority that I'm speaking of, and that we're going to be called up to receive, that you could be part of if you'll change your attitude, humble yourself as a child, and stop acting like a stupid jerk, like a deceived person. And that's what pastor's telling each and every one of us, that we need to identify ourselves in that position. We need to quit acting like a stupid jerk, like we know everything, which we don't. There's never a time we can't be taught something. Pastor says you've got to prove it, because you've got to work yourself into this administration. Into this staff, so to speak, as King David called it. This administration, this group of people who are going to serve underneath the one sent, and they're going to serve hand in hand, working together as a team. And that's the only way it's going to be done. There's many offices in this mansion, and these offices have to work together in this kingdom. And just like in these bugs themselves, if we get into this administration, which we're not going to be allowed into it, but if we were to crawl into this administration and we were to be like one of these bugs that come forth from these diseases where we don't agree with the rest of the administration, it would be like being in Yahweh's Shema, but you know what? I don't like the way they're doing things over there, so I'm going to do it my way. Well, then you start putting confusion into the operating system. Well, that's no different than an STD or something else that puts a bug into your kingdom in your body. It actually admits total confusion, and nothing can get done. Well, that's what Yahweh is saying that is not going to get in his kingdom. He's going to make sure it's eradicated out. He wants everyone that can work hand in hand, not one person doing the whole job. He's shown that from Abel all the way to Yisrayl Hawkins in these last days. If he only needed one man to do the job, he wouldn't have taken 6,000 years and used hundreds of thousands of people to do it. It takes a group of people to get this job done, and Yahweh shows no other way than using that group of people to get a job done. And we have to come in line with that, with the work of Yahweh, and not worry about what everyone else is doing. When someone does something that offends us, then we need to learn to overcome it. If someone does something that's sin to us, we go to the priest. If we don't like the way our brother dresses, the way he combs his hair, well, that's our own problem. That's not his. That's the difference in the personality and the character. If you look over to page 23, in verse 33, it says, and he's speaking of mankind here, it says, they can control the atom now. And we see that with the atomic bombs and the weapons that are taking place in these last days. And it says, they have the power to control the atom. Well, look at the power in this atom. You can't see it with the naked eye, but let me tell you, they can even split it and make it more powerful. This control that the scientists have over the atom. Now, just imagine that what Pastor said about one drop of salt water, about the energy that it could produce, such as a hurricane. Now, that's the power that Yahweh is wanting to give to his people, and he's going to give it to those who qualify. He doesn't want a scientist who wants to guinea pig with some salt water and throw it on someone they don't like. That's not what he wants at all. Yahweh wants someone, if you see someone who's stepping out of line, go instruct them and teach them, this is why things are not working, and this is how you can make them work. This is why you're suffering curses, and this is what you can do to stop them. That's what Yahweh wants. That's what empathy actually is. And that's why we have to have empathy on those who are out in this beastly system. It's not the people, it's the system that has trained these people. Now, in the middle part of verse 33, Pastor says, everybody has turned against one another, everyone. And of course, we have to fight this ourselves. We got to overcome this ourselves. You can't be against Yahweh's work. You can't be against me, speaking of Pastor, against one of your brothers here. You can't. You can't. You've got to be a team. We have to be a team and in unity. You know, I recall back to, if you remember back, it's the last chapter of Yachanan, when Yahshua Messiah, before he had ascended, it was after he had risen, Kepha come to him and he questioned him about one who followed Yahshua. And Yahshua clearly looked at him and said, what is it any of your business? And that's what he told Kepha. What was it any of your business who follows me? You do your job. And that's the way we need to be in these last days. When we're working hand in hand, if someone is sent to work with you, if someone has been put in a position to do something and you don't like it, what any of your business is it? If Yahweh's anointed, if the one sent has placed that person there, if that person has been allowed to be here, allowed to do this or allowed to do that, we need to accept it. If we don't, we fight against Yahweh's work. Praise Yahweh. And you know, it's not for us to judge who's worthy and not worthy, because we ourselves are not worthy of being here in Yahweh's house in these last days. We're actually blessed to be able to be here. And just like the song we sung during the feast, there's only two have been pulled out of deep, dark sin. And one was Noah and the other was Yisrayl Hawkins. And we need to tether ourselves to them, because that's what Yahweh has said, to the chosen branch, both of them being great examples for all of us. If you look over to page 24, everything is a lie. And that's what Pastor says. This is what I remember about it that amazed me, I said, that scriptural, you know. I compared it with Yahweh and what Yahweh said. And that was the start of Yahweh training me to see the microorganisms that He's in control of. And remember, as Isaiah 49 says, Pastor was trained as a polished shaft. From the bowels of his mother, Yahweh called him. He made mention of His name. And He said that I will give you, Yisrael, as a light to the Gentiles. As a light. And remember what that light is. That light is Yahweh's laws, as Proverbs 6:23 says. Or as Psalm says, your law is a lamp unto my feet and a light unto our paths. And that light is going to shine in the darkness, and it's going to remove the cloak of their sins. That is the polishing that took place with Pastor. Yahweh, that light that Yahweh let shine upon him and shines from him was the understanding of His law. And that light only shines upon us if we gather that golden oil which flows forth from the lampstand, from that seventh lamp in these last days that is continually burning, because the fuel will never go out. That light will never go out. That knowledge that Yahweh is giving to Yisrayl Hawkins will never cease. And that's what that light actually is. Praise Yahweh. And remember, the many people we read about, you can read about, Daniel sought to know these things. He wanted to know these things earnestly. We know things in these last days that Daniel begged to know, but he was told to seal it up. It was not for him to know. And many of us have longed to know. We've read in the scriptures, that we even read Revelations many times where it says, and behold, I seen one come upon a cloud. And in these last days, we're actually seeing the things that were spoken of. And we should not question them. We should stand behind Yisrayl Hawkins 100% with everything we have. Praise Yahweh. Now, Pastor says that he doesn't remember what year it was, but he says he remembers he was in high school at the time he read that these things were alive, these microorganisms. And he said, but if you could suddenly reduce yourself to the size of a microorganism and get a piece of hard steel, the hardest steel that you could find, you would find these microorganisms that make that steel. And I remember he gave an example of these steel beams that make up the sanctuary, speaking of how these are actually alive. They're living. They're actually living microorganisms, and they're moving. Pastor says, yes, that piece of steel right there is alive. That can be proven scientifically. So it's not just Yisrayl Hawkins saying this. The scientific field is also saying this, that these things are alive. Now, why is it so hard to believe that the wind that hits you in the face is alive? Now, why would it be that hard? Well, it's this fantasy land that we all live in ourselves. Before we came out in these last days and were called here in these last days to perform this work, there was many things we didn't understand. We did many things we didn't really know why. I mean, how many people used to go trying to pick up the eggs that their Easter bunny laid? No one asked why. They'd just go do it. Now, many people may have been told or trained not to do that. I remember being raised my whole life as being told that was God worship. I was raised, you don't keep Christmas. I was raised, you don't keep birthdays. No one ever told me why. They just said, don't do it. But Yisrayl Hawkins at least shows you why. The House of Yahweh shows you the death that comes from it. It's not a just don't do this. Well, here is why you don't do it. and the hours of study that's went into these things to prove to the people, this is what comes upon you if you do it. This is what will occur. Well, the same thing, these microorganisms that are floating around in the earth that are actually being corrupted by the sins of man, and it's not a mystery how these things take place. I mean, you consider our water supplies, how we contaminate them, how we actually have developed city water systems where a man can go to the restroom, he can use the toilet, flush it down, send it down to the city treatment plant, and then they send it right back to him to fill up his glass of water. Just like Isaiah said they would. You know, if you want to look up something interesting, I'm not going to tell you what it is, but go look up in Isaiah where it says that they will drink their own urine in these last days. Look up that word. The word seminaries will make a lot more sense to you. It's a lot more of the urine they're drinking. And I tell you, it's if you can pick up, just imagine this. If a person that has a disease, if they're finding drugs in the water from the people who are taking the medication, do you really think the other things aren't in the water? Yeah, it's sick. It's very sick. Praise Yahweh for wells. You know, but consider these things. Consider the sickness that's in this world. And these are things pastors brought us for years. You know, that's why when we go out into this world, we're supposed to spray our hands with thieves. We can't take for granted, Yahweh will guard us. Well, Yahweh will if you spray your hands with thieves and you do what you're instructed to do. If we do what we're instructed to do. That's how Yahweh guards us. Yahweh guards us by listening to every word that proceeds out of his mouth, and Yahweh to us is Yisrayl Hawkins. That is the words that proceed from Yahweh's mouth. And that's the only way that we're kept safe from these things. Now look over to verse 38 on page 25. Verse 58, verse 58 on page 25. And it says, now the Pharisees here, he says, let me explain quickly. The Pharisees here taught the laws. They taught the laws of the elders as it was quite a difference. If you want to see what they taught, pick up a Talmud and read it, and you will see the Talmud teaches the laws. And this is the reason they say that they were trained in the law. But the problem is they were trained in what they called the oral law that was handed down by the elders. Now, what elders are they talking about? Well, it wasn't Moshe. Those had written laws that they followed. These laws that they're talking about and the elders that they're talking about are the ones you see in 1 Samuel chapter 8. And they rebelled against Samuel and said, we want a king. We don't want Yahweh reigning over us anymore. And they openly rebelled. And we even see that in these last days. And you know, it's a hard thing when you see a loved one leave, or you see someone who is a dear friend of you leave, and you realize it's not you they're leaving, it's Yahweh they're rejecting. It's Yahweh's way of life they're turning down. They want to go out into this world, and they want to believe what this world has to offer. And it's this deception. And it's very deadly deception. You know, and all of these things, speaking of this oral law, during the feast when Pastor showed the film, who are the fools that made up the rules? You know, you were thinking of, and they were showing, of course, it was about language, you know, and the K in front of night, and the different spellings, and the lack of common sense these things make. But the only thing I could think of when I was hearing who are the fools that made up the rules, all I could remember thinking of when I was standing with a few other Kahans on the National Lawn in Washington, D.C., looking at the Capitol building. And I remember standing there thinking, these are the fools that make up these laws. And it's not to speak evil or bad of them, but they literally make decisions that make actual no common sense. You have the Supreme Court that are supposed to implement these laws. You have our Congress and our Senate that's supposed to create these laws. You know, and you have all of these three different branches of the government that's supposed to work together, and it's the most complicated system. As Daniel said, he was amazed at the laws that come forth, and that there's no life in them. But who are the fools that make up these rules? When you go to your state's or your nation's capital and you're $15-16 trillion in debt, and you see them tearing up a perfectly decent concrete sidewalk to lay down a marble one on Pennsylvania Avenue because they want a better look, and you're $16 or $15 trillion in debt, it becomes very quickly understood that someone somewhere is not using common sense in making decisions. And we spend trillions. If you know the future priest, the priests and priestesses, they did this commercial, and it went into the in-depth of why aren't we doing something? Why are we spending billions and billions, if not trillions of dollars on war, but we can't squeeze a penny out to save someone's life through peace? These rich men we spoke about earlier that run Microsoft and Berkshire Hathaway, they'll donate billions of dollars to try to find a cure for AIDS. You would think someone would say, well, quit doing the act that causes the disease. You know, and it wouldn't cost them $1 billion. All they'd have to do is turn into Yahweh.com. And if they would tune into that, they could get it for free. They could look at our satellite and get it for free. You know, it's freely we have been given and freely we give. But if they really wanted to do something, you know, it reminds me of these men in the Secret Service that's in the news right now that are being dismissed from their jobs or stepping aside because they were found out that they were messing around with some prostitutes. You know, and they're being made to look so evil right now. And yes, they made some poor decisions. You know, but the House of Yahweh would be more than willing to tell them, if you would like to know why those decisions were made, that very system that's condemning you is the one that taught you these things. And you don't have to go back very far to find a president who was doing the very same thing in the White House. He didn't get impeached. He didn't lose his job. In fact, he served 2 terms. But now they want to condemn you. But this is the very system that promotes this garbage. The only act that they did that the government's probably not approving of is they got caught. If they hadn't got caught, no one would say a word. I very seriously doubt that they were the first ones to ever do such a thing. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised if it ain't taxpayer dollars paying for it after it's all said and done. Wouldn't surprise me at all. And people can say, well, that's bogus. Well, we pay the bills on the White House, and it was done there, so it's not as bogus as people think. Now, looking over into verse 62, Christianity, they try to find loopholes so they don't have to keep the laws, and that's what they consistently look for. They look for these loopholes so they don't have to keep the laws, and they'll say Jesus Christ is their Savior and that He did it for them, and of course that's their biggest loophole they have. And it's so they can do their evil. They're actually looking for something. They're looking for something to agree with their sin, so they can commit their sin, so they can do what it is they want to do. And if you look middle way down in verse 62 on page 26, it says, well, that's Christianity. It finds loopholes, as they say, and Jesus Christ is their biggest loophole, so they can do their evil, which is what we see throughout the earth today and still get to heaven. You know, and that's what they say, and that's what they call it. You know, I've known many people who they preach this, you just got to come down to the altar and get saved. And I've known many people who, if they served Yahweh's house the way that they've been trained to serve these churches, they would be very, very diligent people. And one day I'm sure that they will receive that opportunity to do so, because once again, they're only part of that system that's being created. But these very people that go down to these altars and they confess that they're a sinner, they're scared to death to die. They will seek medical attention to no end to try not to die. They don't realize that when they're dying, that church that was teaching them, those doctors that were treating them, and is taking every nickel that they were able to make, and now they're trying to make it so everybody can pay the doctors for their diseases instead of telling them to stop. They're actually draining every nickel they can get from them. So not only have they been used throughout that whole time to build up that church's, that preacher's house or buy him a nice car or whatever, well, they're also being used by the medical profession. And all it took was someone showing them the sin they was committing or they were committing is killing them. That's all it really took. And that's what Yahweh's telling us, that we have to be able to be trained to do this, that we can stand up and teach this world that their sins are killing them and show them how they're killing them. But in doing that, we ourselves cannot walk in sin. You who says, do not steal, do you steal? You who says, do not commit adultery, do you commit adultery? And that's what we have to be able to do, is to stand before not only these people, but before Yahweh, and then be able to stand and do these things. And there is no loopholes in these laws. If you don't keep them, dying you will die. Blessed will you be if you do this, and cursed will you be if you do this. And that's exactly what Deuteronomy actually says. And Yahweh was very clear with those things. Now, if you look over to verse 82 real quick, we're going to finish up right here. In verse 82, on page 27, it says, well, the prophecies was that he would come and the whole congregation of Israel would kill Yeshua. And that's speaking of Yeshua. It showed that the Lamb of Yahweh would come and that he would be killed. Well, he fulfilled this prophecy. And of course, the people who were looking for this prophecy, like the Samaritan woman, where I brought out last week, Yeshua started a work in Samaria there by saying, I, the one. And remember, this sermon was given back in July of 2010, so that shows how long Pastor was actually bringing out about this Samaritan woman. But remember what the Samaritan woman did. She found out that the one whom Yahweh was going to send had come, and she told everyone. She found out the Messiah was there, and she did not stop. She told everyone, He is here. He is here. And that's what we have to do in these last days. And that's what we're doing, going around the world. And, well, how do you actually do that? Well, I work in the garden. I'm not able to. I do this. I do that. It all comes by service. Everybody working together pushes this work out for this world to see. Everyone working together. You don't necessarily have to be on a satellite system doing it. You have to be a part of the work, assisting in the work. And I can tell you, many people ask, what does it take to do a missionary trip? Whenever you start, the first thing we start with is clean food. And that starts all the way out into the dirt out here. And it goes through many very loyal, diligent hands, along with milk and meat and many other things to actually get that done. Because I'm telling you, if you've ever been on a missionary trip and you had to take a plane, you go hungry for a couple days. I would rather starve than eat the things out in this world. And at least when you get the food from here, you're very thankful because you know that there's nothing that's going to contaminate you. Praise Yahweh. Now look down into verse 83 real quick. It says, the same thing is taking place in these last days with the peaceful solution, because a lot of people read their scriptures. A lot of people were looking for the house before it was even established. And I know a lot of people have that story. They knew there would be a place teaching the laws in these last days. And for all those who are listening that have never been here, and I know there's many that listen on the internet and that has tuned in all around the world, whether it's 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning right now, this place is here. Yahweh's witness has been chosen. And there's many, many, many people tethering themselves to that branch. And I know I see many of them sitting here today. So if everyone will please stand, we will go ahead and close with prayer. Glorious and most honorable Father, whose name is Yahweh. Father, once again, this is your servant, Con Ilya Haller Hawkins, coming before you with all the men from here at Abel, Father Yahweh, being at your great house upon the dawn of this Sabbath day. All of us being a seed of the 7th Malach in these last days, the only one sent to bring forth your message to this dying world, and through the authority of our high priest, Yeshua Messiah, which has been placed over your great house. And most righteous fathers, we come before you once again. We praise you and thank you for all the blessings you have bestowed upon us, your people. And we do continually pray for this world, Father Yahweh, for those whom you are calling out for their protection and for their safe deliverance to your house. And we pray that this great kingdom, Father, which you are soon to establish upon this earth, and the system that will bring true peace to this world, will soon take over the ruling kingdoms of this world, Father Yahweh. And we do pray for even those who hate us at this time, Father Yahweh, that their minds would be open to see what your house is bringing, and to see what the other system that has been bringing them for 6,000 years, Father, causing the death and the disease, that they will see that that these things are a result of what they've only been taught, and that we offer nothing but love and true guidance, and to work hand in hand with these people, Father Yahweh. And we do pray for all of those who are in foreign countries that are unable to get to your house at this time, that the way would be made for them, Father Yahweh, soon to be able to come, that the walls would be broken down, and that the prisoners would let me go free, just as you said that would take place in Isaiah. We do continually pray for the protection of the great Khan Yedidia and for his soon deliverance, and we also pray for the health of your people, Father Yahweh, that all would remain healthy until the end, and if there be anyone lacking, Father, that it would be made known to your house, and that they would seek your house, and that they would seek the authority and the administration you have placed in these last days, that all things would be done decently and orderly. We do thank you and praise you for all things, and for calling us out in these last days, that we may serve you, and pray that we would never be removed from your sight. And we do ask all of these things once again, being a seed of the 7th Malach, and through the authority of a high priest, Yeshua Messiah. Hallelujah, Yahweh. Praise you.